Hey, everybody, welcome back to Human. Joe Klemczewski with Jeff Stuckey. And in 25 years, Mr. Stuckey, I would never have imagined you would send me 3 pages of notes in an outline for a
Oh,
podcast.
you do. I'm telling you, man, Claude has changed my life.
You have already replaced yourself with AI.
Oh my God. Well, have I told you about my little rigging of Claude?
No.
So, the consultant that I work with has tied Claude, and it will sound like I know what I'm talking about, and I literally have no idea what I'm talking about. But Obsidian Vault acts as a long-term memory. And so, like, we've put like 15 personality assessments from values to my Colby score, all of these different kinds of things. And so all of my Claude anything that I do on Claude runs through Obsidian Vault, which is essentially me, and then just spits it's the efficiency of it. And as you know, herding my thoughts is like herding cats. I will send you a picture.
Mm.
It as as Claude stores things in Obsidian Vault, it creates this graph. If you look at this graph, you now understand the brain of Jeff Stuckey. It is like,
Well, so that's the thing with AI. Everybody I talk to who knows more than I do always says you have no idea. You have like everybody starts out using it like a search engine, and when you actually start using AI to do work, like then you're moving. And I will say this, I've got you on Anthropic, and I've liked that so far. But a new client hired me for health coaching, and I asked him, he's from the East Coast. Like I always, how did you hear about me? And usually I think it's from YouTube. You watch some videos or something. And he said Chat GPT. So like, wow, you search like who is the best nutrition health coach in the world, and it came up with me. Now I'm a fan of Chat GPT. I got to go check that one out.
yeah, and I will tell you something that because I kind of used it a little bit just in general, like, okay, whatever, but much like you described, more of a search engine. But then this long time consultant that I've worked with is like, okay, I'm going to now unleash the power of, and, but the thing that I find interesting about it is, and I don't know if this is specific to Claude or if all platforms, like when it gets shit wrong, it's not a little bit wrong.
Yeah.
In it's
Right.
like in the deep, deep weeds wrong. So if you don't have a certain level of expertise to anchor to know that it's hallucinating, the results could be absolutely catastrophic. And the more that I got into it and was able to use it, as a professional tool, it's like I am so glad that nothing catastrophic happened before because when those motherfuckers go off the rails, and it's still on occasion somehow created this idea that I was dating a woman named Deanne that I met at Planet Fitness.
Wow. Just made that shit up.
100%. And I mean, we had Herculean battles for him to finally like get over that. And that's just one example of I mean, it now that I know how to use it and I know I have to be insanely diligent, it's still, multitudes of efficiency for me to be able to utilize it. But still, you have to be incredibly conscientious and I hear people all the time now telling me, they kind of supplement their therapy with GTP, and it's like, okay, well, see you next week. We'll see. Hopefully, nothing catastrophic
Yeah.
happens in the meantime.
So I did something new with Anthropic that did surprise me. It did startle me a bit. I asked when that client told me what ChatGPT told him, I asked the same question to Claude, who is the best nutrition health coach in the world? And it did not say me. It, gave kind of a couple bios of people. And I said, why didn't you respond with Joe Klemczewski? And in real time, I mean, the cursor starts moving instantly. Oh, my bad. You're right. And then it started going through my bio, and Dr. Joe Klemczewski created, flexible dieting and blah, 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 blah. And then like it literally started like apologizing, and we were having a real time conversation, which was very interesting to say the least.
I don't know
It,
if it's
it was not just like it did not feel like just an automated reflexive bot.
right. It's yeah. I have a anytime I meet with my consultant, once a week, and anytime I refer to him as he, like he's like it, and I'm like,
Yeah, we anthropomorphize things so quickly.
I mean,
Yeah,
he's like it's an it. It is not a
yeah.
he. It's like
Okay,
yes,
man. Well,
buyer
you
beware.
you and Claude came up with a great topic. We're going to talk about love. And the only thing I like about this is that I get to sit back and just watch you just wax eloquently in a therapeutic way and model. So, where do you want to start with this topic on love? And I would say, first of all, from my perspective, the utility of this is, of course, we want better relationships. We want fulfillment. We want better friendships. We want hopefully some kind of life partner. I think most of us want that. So you have dealt with this for a few decades now. Where do people need to go to learn about love?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one thing I would add to that is also relationship to self, because,
Mm.
self-love isn't new. The Stoics struggled with the idea of self-love. What specifically does that entail? So I would add that. Um, and it it's such an interesting thing because the Greeks, the Romans had almost an entire vocabulary to describe love, and you'd have to study to to understand love. And then our modern culture obviously has swung to the furthest extreme, where we have reduced it down to a single word with what essentially would be an infinite number of meanings. It just you think about just how loose and free we are with the expression love. I mean, the phrase "I love that." I mean, for most of us, that's probably one of our top two, three phrases. I love that, and it's like, is that inherently negative? Maybe not, but it does have implications in terms of the integrity of the word and what does it really mean. To where I would argue that it has largely become meaningless to the point that it's purely a concept that doesn't have a solid transfer of application into behavior. It doesn't, what does it even mean? And again, if I could indict our modern culture, I think we have we have hyper elevated self-love. And I would tell you, Joe, that it errs more on a side of a narcissistic adoration than something that is in the best interest. It's like, what if I am just in horrible physical shape and I am, I'm eating donuts and, at every meal, living the most self-destructive lifestyle. that there is that self-love? So what effectually then what standard are we holding love to? And I see this wreak havoc in relationship, obviously marital relationship, committed relationship, because it stays at the conceptual level. It's like I will, there's two questions that I ask in the first session of um, every couples counseling session that I have, which is what is what does marriage mean and what does love mean? And without the it's every time I pose that question, it's just a deer in headlights, like and it's like, and I don't do that in any way to, like in a shameful sort of way, but to really punctuate to the couple, you, you don't even, we don't even have anything to act on here. Like we don't, and it stays purely at that conceptual level, and that somehow it has to translate into practice. And then when you just look at how we have romanticized it, we have essentially put it into emotional experience that that we should be in this perpetual state of falling in love, that we should, the euphoria, the dopamine rush of infatuation is what we're supposed to have through the duration of a relationship that is known as a loving relationship. And so you have, which we all know outside of the context of a relationship, how capricious our emotional state is. I mean, it's fucking all over the place. Like, at 8:30 in the morning, I'm invincible. By 3 o'clock, I don't even remember what I do for a living. It's just so then you hyperinflate the expectations of my partner that they're supposed to be all things to me and meet all of my needs, and not only meet my needs but anticipate my needs before I even have them. And it's like, no wonder the divorce rate is 56%. No wonder, we're having, these battles over, well, I love myself and I'm not going to settle for anyone, and it just is like, and I have seen that shift. I would say when I started practicing 25 years ago, probably some of our more traditional conceptions of love, love as a commitment, love as an action, love being other-centered. There were still some remnants of that, love being a commitment. But I would tell you, I have seen this, what I would consider catastrophic shift more towards this narcissistic, self-indulgent, emotionally flatulent love experience that everybody is now chasing, and no one is finding or experiencing any of it.
I would almost insert the caveat that I think is very, very true in the West, but not necessarily everywhere,
Concurred. Yes.
because that particular mental platform is very hedonic, which is what capitalism is based on, where
100%.
you're
Yes.
just, it is all about what can I get? How successful can I be? How happy can I make myself? And everything you're talking about really rings true through several lenses. One, my wife and I will celebrate our 35th wedding anniversary this year, and there were some rocky times
Hard
there.
fucking work,
I,
right? There's only
I
one
I
way to
had to
get
learn a
going.
lot of things.
Yeah.
But you also said there that the two questions you ask right up front is, what is love, what is marriage, etc. Um, Academically, this is where we all start with definitions. You introduce anybody to a new topic, and let's lay down the definitions first, so we know what tools we're dealing with. And I see the same thing. I think that's brilliant. You do that because now we have a goal. So this will not surprise you. But when I decided, okay, Jeff's going to carry this entire topic, I'll just sit back and relax. But maybe I'll go find something I can insert.
Oh, really?
I went,
You find you.
guess where I went? I went to a
Galactic.
molecular neuroendocrinologist to learn about love.
All right, let's do it. Let's hear it. Come on.
This is totally parallel to what you're talking about with definitions.
Okay.
I feel if people understand what's happening literally in their brains, and we can talk about how the initial surge of love, like you meet somebody, when I first saw Tracy 37 years ago, and it's like, wow, what is going on inside my brain? It's dopamine. And then you start talking and it's oxytocin. And then there's a convergence of serotonin and cortisol. Then eventually you get to some what are they called? Endorphins, like a beta endorphin. And there's an entire cycle that Mother Nature is taking you through. And each one of those has a profoundly different impact on our behavior and the permanence or lack thereof of how we view that other person. And so I just feel like if I could insert even just anything into our conversation, it will be occasionally coming back to those elements because I think as you talk about the behavioral aspects of here's what we need to do from a therapeutic perspective, if somebody says, "Oh, this is what this needs to feel like," it's almost like when we talk about MDMA or psilocybin or DMT, those kind of things, and we know all the research going on and how amazing these things are already in phase 2 and 3 clinical trials. And you're getting to a state where you can almost completely take somebody out of depression and PTSD by changing the neurochemistry. And then once somebody feels that, they have a plumb line. They could say, wow, that's what I should feel like. That's what's normal. And almost in a somatic way, psychosomatic way, you can recreate that. I think that's incredibly important, as at least in a biological sense, to whatever we can offer through philosophy and psychology.
Yes. So are you going to lay us a foundation on that, right? Like,
Well, I would say I'll give you just a couple
yeah.
points like dopamine. Obviously it's a big cliche word right now. It's slightly misunderstood in that it literally starts the reward system. It's just the starting point. And so whatever you get that you like, whatever wins you get, your brain says, fuck yeah, I want more of that. I want more of that. So when you lock eyes on somebody, you're interested, woo, this is somebody I'm interested in. Just with those initial mirror neurons, you're both, sending signals just through facial expressions and all of that stuff. Like that reward center is lit up. Like it's game on. And now there is a pursuit, and it turns into something cautious because now instantly there are stakes. And so uh, serotonin and cortisol like interplay where cortisol actually spikes, which creates stress and anxiety, which is why you're timid, maybe you're a little trepidatious in like, well, what if I say the wrong thing in this? Because again, evolution is saying, yeah, you better get this right. Like you need to make this person attracted to you. So this is happening in both of your brains, and serotonin is kind of filling that in. I want to like this person, and you're just ebbing and flowing with that. And then oxytocin, of course, is how we imprint on each other. So when you touch like a newborn baby, as soon as they hug their mother, they hear their mother's voice, or they look into their mother's eyes, like their brain floods with oxytocin. And this is imprinting, like you are for me, you are for me, you are the one. And this reward cycle keeps looping to the point where eventually what you just talked about with commitment and so forth, the beta endorphins are there for more permanence, where even with your spouse, if you're doing things right, if you're taking Jeff Stucke's advice, then even the boring times are things you like to share with your spouse or your significant other. It's like, I would rather be with you than anyone else. And there's a sinking into the long term where it's no longer about just dopamine and instant reward like it was. That's what pulls you together. By the way, oxytocin, yeah, hoping I didn't say OxyContin, the drug, oxytocin, it peaks during orgasm. Like when you have an orgasm, which is a brain phenomena, it's as much oxytocin as you can feel. So that's how powerful that is. And when you're first falling in love, just your hands touching each other's hands like can make your brain do that. Like boom, there's all this oxytocin. Just that one look where it was like that second look, like that second take, and you know that person's interested in you. And so all of this stuff is very chronologically important. And then I think at some point we have to academically know these things so that the beta endorphins and more of the long-term neurochemistry we are okay with, and we look to reinforce some of those beginning stages. You look to create those moments of heightened dopamine and reward with serotonin, Valentine's Day, those kind of things. So you know that from Gottman that the biggest predictor of long-term success in a relationship is physical touch, cuddling, snuggling, non-sexual contact. The more you have, your likelihood of staying together just skyrockets. Because again, you now are taking the knowledge of love and you are intentionally implementing it into your relationship so that you are recreating the right or the best neurochemistry in your partner. And then that reinforces your own.
And I think there's something that I think there's an element there that we should probably parse apart a little bit in that the shift towards narcissistic self-adoration love, because I think this has profound practical implications that this inflated, which, this self-love and I'm not going to settle for anything else and that sort of thing. And so this creates some narcissistic tendencies within relationship. Number one, my partner should just know. And then number two, emotion first. And this I think is so critical because I don't even think any of us realize how literally starved we are for significant emotional touch. And, again, to use a less masculine word, but the exact right word, which is cuddling. But we've reversed those. You should make me feel like doing that. You should make me, and once I feel, and it's like, that's exactly backwards. That is exactly backwards because of what you precisely just described. The cuddling produces the result. But that one little nuance, if anyone takes anything away from this podcast, would be that element that you don't the cuddling, the holding hands, the hugging past just the obligatory, those are the practices. That is the weeding the garden. That is the reps in the gym. That is the pick your favorite analogy. I don't care. But I would say that somehow we have to get that one right, particularly as it relates to longevity in committed relationships. You go to the gym, especially when you don't feel like it. You go do the work when you don't feel like it. That is infinitely and exponentially true of the physical touch. When you feel like your husband's a dick or your wife's a bitch, that is exactly when, because that's the cortisol spike, right? So now I have to do the work of that so that the work of physical touch creates the experience of oxytocin. I have a standard practice with my couples, and it's like once a week they sit down and I I call it bitch sessions. Some couples don't like it. They'll call it pulling weeds, or I don't give a fuck what you call it. But you're going to intentionally sit down and work on your relationship. Because, if I'm pissed off at my partner, they're over there enjoying something else, and I'm building my argument, right? And I'm going back into the catalog and I'm getting all of the historical proof that I need because I'm pissed off and nothing's got a shelf life now. So I can go all the way back to our fucking honeymoon and use that against you again. And you're just sitting there thinking everything's just fine. And then I sit down and I say those titanic words, we need to talk. To which everyone, anytime a species hears we need to talk, the cortisol level goes like through the roof. Like, yeah, well, I need to go run a marathon right now. So sorry. Like, and so we hear those words. I'm triggered. I'm in a defensive state. And it's like, then what happens? A 4 to 6 hour argument to which somebody just finally gives up and says, you're right, I'm a piece of shit, just so this conversation will end. And it's like, okay, you're going to sit down and you're going to both be present with the intention of taking care of the relationship. And after that, you're going to take a walk, at least 20 minutes. You're going to hold each other's hands and you're going to expect nothing of each other. Well, he should be saying this. Why isn't he bringing this up? Or, God, what should I say right? It's like, no, you're going to reward each other with unconditional love, holding each other's hand to really cement that connection of oxytocin. And
So brilliant.
anyway, I could go on about that, but it's like it, those are the components, Joe, that I feel like in a modern industrialized world where, we worship products more than anything else, we have to get that one back to right.
So I'm glad you came back to oxytocin there for a minute and holding hands. Do you know that oxytocin, when it's present and surging, literally blocks the amygdala? So your threat perception, any fear, any anxiety, it immediately starts to soothe that. And I'm going to give you a perfect example. I hope I never forget it because it's such a model to me of true emotional maturity and love. I was in the back of a vehicle, like a big SUV, and a bunch of friends, two or three couples, and I'm probably in the back row. And the guy driving, there's traffic, and everything's just high energy, on edge, and he just yells at his wife, like you just said, like you're supposed to be telling me where to go. You're watching GPS, one of those things, and it was like so aggressive and over the top. I was just like, oh, fuck. Like, I know how embarrassed she must feel to get that lashing in front of four other people. Do you know what she did? She turned to him, put her hand on his arm, and said, honey, just go around the block and go here. Like it was almost like watching a mother with a 4 year old, a good mother with a 4 year old. But at the same time, like, I don't know how she did that. And it wasn't like a show. I'm like, she fucking knows how to be a partner. Like,
Right? Because you can't fake that, right? You
I
cannot.
mean, to me, that's the telltale sign, like how you act in that crisis moment. They weren't in a therapy session. He obviously failed the test. I mean, he's yelling at his wife in a high stress situation, and she was 100% the opposite. And to me, that's just a model of man, do I need to just be patient, create that Viktor Frankl gap of stimulus before my response, and just learn how to control and regulate my own responses. And it's just like that was an amazing picture of actual love to me.
Yeah, as we have these conversations over the next couple of weeks, probably what I will contend the strongest about love is that we do have the behavioral emotional component backwards, that I should feel and then do versus I do so I will feel. And but that goes back to, a sociological obstacle of, a hedonistic culture that values pleasure, feeling, you know, above all of other things, which is which that component in and of itself, and maybe we need to land for a minute and make sure hedonism isn't, we're not taking that for granted. Um, but it just pleasure seeking, like that's it. Like you can elaborate on that if I'm oversimplifying it, but it's just seeking my own personal pleasure above all other things is hedonism.
Yeah,
And
there's definitely a little yin and yang that I even wanted to come back to one of your opening statements. But again, I have to say to your point about we get them backwards and we should do what we know we need to do, and then the feelings will follow. My friend, when she turned to her husband and put her hand on his arm, I mean, now I know it's almost like watching a primate documentary. Like that touch, again, oxytocin. Instantly, oxytocin is now in his brain, calming down his amygdala. Instead of her feeling discarded and assaulted, she's reconnecting with him. And just in that brief moment of just touching, you could just see reconnection, like literal the picture of reconnection and balancing the ship. But you talked about not just now with hedonism, but back to a narcissism of it's all about me and my pleasure. I feel like there is an extreme, and there probably are still people who struggle correctly with not having enough self-worth, self-esteem in the true clinical psychological sense. And then those people who go to the other end of the continuum and it's me, 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 I'm entitled to everything. So just for a second, do you see the difference in couples where one is completely boundaryless and they don't have enough self-love and self-worth versus too much seeking for their own good?
of course, and I was kind of thinking about that. I was going to take some liberty with your example of, this husband and wife, but what if that derailed and was the fucked up version? And, you think about, one, let's say it activates her fight response, right? So then she just lashes back and he lashes back, and now it's just this escalation of lashing. And you can see how that is, that becomes a zero sum game. I mean, it just, you know, but the other version of that, right? He lashes out at her, activates her flight response, right? So she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, honey. You're right. I should have been paying better attention." So now he asked, "You're fucking right. You should have been paying better fucking attention. Goddamn fuck, I'm so sorry." So you can see how that then
Mm.
also can escalate to zero sum. And those would typically be, a third example, which, he's passive aggressive and like he just shuts up, and now you're 50 miles off course, and she suddenly realizes like, "Hey, hon, where are we? Like we're at." "Well, you weren't paying any attention, so I just kept driving," that sort of a thing. There are different variations of that, but I would say the lashing out escalation, and then that's just a game of chicken, right? Who's going to give in first? But then to your point, if her flight response activates, and this is what, can we just take a minute and talk about the real fucking power that that woman had in that scenario?
It was astounding.
I mean, who was the most powerful person in the car?
I mean, 10 years later, I'm talking about it on a podcast.
And that's one of the things that I think, Joe, it's like this is where kind of our over like narcissistic self-love is like, well, she shouldn't put up with that. She ought to tell him to pull the fucking car over and like she's whatever. You know what I'm saying? It's like and miss the real power of that situation. That is such that is such a beautiful example of how powerful love can be.
Mm. So one more thing I learned, I'm going to bring up that term that we both liked that I learned from Scott Galloway, emotional generosity.
Oh yeah, love it.
The beta endorphin
So you know,
long
if you search
term.
that on the web now, I coined it.
We'll do that. Well, if we say it enough times, I think then yes,
Hey
AI will
Claude,
tell
who
people we
coined it?
did.
That's
Yeah,
exactly
we just
right.
need one iteration more than Scott Galloway. Um, so to get that long-term beta endorphin flow between two people who are creating that symbiotic relationship, the things that keep that going is also a form of craving, which dopamine gives us. But the reward is more, like I said, those mundane things like laughter. If I'm emotionally present enough to when my wife tells a joke and I actively laugh, even if it's not funny, I mean, just like you're just being present and you're being gracious, then guess what? She wants to be with me more. It's one of the things you ask women what they like, just in a poll, in men. One of the top three is always somebody who makes me laugh. Well, that's completely true for everybody, whether we can articulate it or not, because that's how we keep craving to be around that person. They think I'm funny or they think I'm worth listening to, even if it's corny. Things like singing, things like activity. You just, as you said, you walk down the street holding hands, or you're just present with somebody. On Valentine's Day, we went out with three or four other couples, and we went to an arcade and went bowling. And so everybody's laughing, everybody's having a great time, holding hands. Like that's just being together, doing all of those things that create that endorphin flow, and then it cements in that other person's mind that this is who I want to be with. Like I don't want to have to go through all of those other iterations of falling in love because this is my person. We do have obviously vasopressin and things like that in our brain that are there for long-term pair bonding. Not every species has that. We do, but I would say that has to be cultivated. Obviously we can stray from that, and this is how we do that. It comes back to doing the things that creates that mental and neuro framework in the other person.
And I'll give you another example of that because one of the things that I've noticed, after doing this a minute is, couples will come in distress, right? And they're embedded in the power struggle. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. Whatever it may be. They may be arguing over what color the sky is. Usually they have like their default argument that they'll fall back into. And once I can kind of nudge them out of the power struggle to where they start to communicate with some level of vulnerability and trust and out of that reactivity. And it's like there's this, you to use Viktor Frankl, that ever so small space between stimulus and response. So I'll finally get couples to where they feel some sense of connection, right? But they're used to the power struggle. And if I sit there too long, they'll feel the vulnerability and they'll immediately go back into the power struggle. But you this and you, and then they're right fucking back in it. And so one of the things that I have learned to do is I will sit just long enough. And right before I can tell the power struggle is about to launch, I will crack some kind of a joke and get them laughing and get them in that state to where they're like, because that sense of like, holy shit, we're out of the power struggle, but we don't fully trust each other yet. And we just had this moment. okay, I'm going to pick up my bat and start using it again. It's like, no, I have to be, it's just enough time to let that vulnerability like set just a little bit, but then it's like, okay, here comes the joke because they're about to like start go right back into that power struggle. And I can even remember, when I started to practice, like getting criticized for that, like what are you like, why are you doing that? Like what? And I don't know at the time that I could particularly articulate it as well, because I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. But it was like knowing that that space had a shelf life, that if you left them in it too long without some other positive emotion to go to, then they are going to fall back into the power struggle and just right back into blaming and deflecting and those kinds of things. And it's a little bit counterintuitive, but it's like, yeah, fuck. Once you've solved a problem, laugh, celebrate, sing, dance. I don't give a fuck. Just don't fall back into, the paradigm of the power struggle.
And I have to be the boring biology guy
Correct. Oh, boring biology
j-
guy.
just to reinforce what that does. You keep going back to gym and training metaphors, so I'm gonna stay right there. I worked with a complex spine surgeon for a couple years. He's written a couple books on long-term chronic pain management, and along with my own neurosurgeon who has the same philosophy, or I should say, understanding of neurology. The brain, of course, what fires together wires together. So in a sense of physical pain, when you're constantly thinking about that knee that hurts and my arthritic knee, and oh my gosh, it's going to rain, my knee hurts, and oh, what I do yesterday, my knee hurts, and all you do is think about your pain, your brain centers that interpret pain actually hypertrophy. They get better at feeling pain. As a matter of fact, you start feeling more pain than you used to feel, and you feel it more often because now your brain is a pain fucking champion. Like it knows how to interpret and exacerbate pain, and you're truly feeling this because that's what your brain does. Perception is reality. As soon as you start ignoring those things, don't talk about it, tell all your friends and family, don't ask me about it anymore. I'm just like, I'm going to ignore it. Like neurologically, those structures atrophy, and now you literally have less pain. You take less pain medication. Psychologically, what you're doing with your patients, I would say, is giving them the practice and the routines and the tasks, the homework to go home, and not only are you behaviorally teaching them that that's more fun, isn't it great to actually like each other instead of hate each other? But their brains are changing and they're getting better at doing that. They're getting the reps in. And I will say, because I'm not a therapist like you, but having screwed a lot of things up in relationships and learned and hopefully improving, the space between really being bad and really having a great relationship is not that far apart.
It is shockingly narrow.
I was that guy when you said, I mean, I almost laughed out loud when you said, well, you should just know. Like, you should know what I want. You should know. I mean, I want what everybody else wants. I just want to feel love or whatever, appreciation, like those things. But to never have those conversations and never to discuss it in the relationship context together, you just don't like it doesn't come to mind maybe. And so here I am, struggling and feeling disconnected, and like the marriage is just not going to go anywhere. Like we need to be divorced. And then learning those skills, going through the therapy, all of a sudden I'm just doing small things that now is reinforcing love to my spouse, who then reciprocates that back to me. So now I do, it's just not that far to go. But for some reason, the ego makes it feel like the Grand Canyon.
With that, it is exactly right. It is, and it, I mean, I sense that just, when couples come in and they're just hell bent, and it's like, and most couples don't want therapy, right? When they first come to marriage counseling, they want the third person to break the tie of who's right and who's wrong. And it's like when you talk about, well, what if we created a healthy, loving marriage where you two communicated in a way that drew you closer together and created intimacy and trust? And they're like, we don't have fucking time for that. Who's right and who's wrong? That's a literal conversation. And it, 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 it is a profound observation that it is so, so, so much closer than it feels like it could possibly be. And I do want to nuance a couple of things. I do, you know, the other thing that Gottman talks about, which is love mapping, which is the practice of me taking on learning what my partner needs. And that's critical. Now, going back to what we said, your partner should even if your partner's the best love mapper ever, you still can't fall into the trap of they should just know. And I where I'm at is, I'm a little bit infatuated with the virtues right now. And virtues for the Stoics, for the Romans, for the Greeks, they were the practices, right? You just did them. You didn't do them for attention. You didn't do them for response. You just did them. And if we're going to course correct, which I desperately think we need to do, I do think we need to try to bump the needle more towards love as a virtue, simply a practice that I engage in. And here's where I tell you the nuance that I see this the most, Joe, is doing with expectation. You know, if I buy my wife this, surely I'll get a blowjob. You know, if I do this, then this will happen. If I do that, I think we have fallen towards more of an external locus that this behavior will get me this versus I'm doing this for this sake. And finding our way back to that and having that as a general practice, how do I communicate love as a daily practice? I hold myself to saying hi to everybody. Can't always do it. Sometimes the sidewalk's crowded, but it's like I'm not going to stand on the elevator with another complicated, amazing human being and ignore their presence. It's like, so what are the standards that I personally hold myself to practice the virtue of love? And part of that practice is to destroy the dependence of an outcome or a result. No, I just do it for the sake of doing it. And then bringing that back into my more intimate, more important relationships, that I do this because of my commitment to the relationship, not to get a certain outcome.
There is a growing movement there. I think is his name Ryan Holiday, who's written all the books on Stoicism.
He's killing it right now, and dude ain't wrong, is he?
No, and that's why it attracts so many people. I mean, everybody can look around and say, well, this isn't working, clearly.
Right?
I have a friend who is an American-born college professor, scientist, academic, who has become a literal Buddhist monk. And I so love and respect the philosophies of Hinduism and Buddhism, two totally different things, but similar in the fact that they are very other centered. They are not faith structures that say this is how I can get to heaven and avoid hell. It's how can I collectively be the most use to my fellow man? How do I become the best human being I can be and be a blessing to humanity and the planet? So that's what I'm infatuated with. And there was a great Buddhist saying I read. and I can't remember it. It was so eloquent. I can't restate it, but it was all about me just seeing myself as the least and always wanting to give people the most. So that very servant-hearted attitude, but the way it was just structured grammatically was piercing to the point where you can see it as the complete dissolution of ego. Because as you're saying, I'm doing this with zero expectation. I'm just the intent is just to be the best I can be for that person. And man, your life is going to be great if you can be that person in your relationships.
And I think as a corollary to that, just kind of in a because I spent uh, quite a while in Buddhism and still love Buddhism. It's like I couldn't pass a quiz, but philosophically have been greatly impacted. And I remember one of the primary tenets of Buddhism is that the root of all suffering is desire, desiring what you do not have or desiring more of what you do have, which is essentially hedonism, right? I mean, it's like, but then when you invert that, giving for the sake of giving, and again, these are things that we know, but I feel like they have moved so much into the conceptual and romantic in the traditional romantic sense of the word. I'm not talking like rom-com romantic, but it's like this romantic, oh, well, yeah, well, yes. Well, of course I love. Well, of course these sorts of things. And it's like, well, how do you do that? Well, what do you mean, how do I do that? I just, and it's like now we're just in this circular loop. And Holiday, I don't know how familiar you are with his work, but boy practices what he preaches. I mean, that is
Mm.
the air that he breathes. And his mastery of the understanding. If anybody out there listening is the obstacle is the way is just such it sounds so simple and it is, but his development of that in practice is extraordinary and just and love can be the love the obstacle to the love I want is these sorts of things and it's
Doing love.
doing love. That's it, precisely right. And it's like, it's interesting because when you consider Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And as each level is met, you get to the level where you can, pursue self-actualization. And I think modern industrial society blows that up. No, when you get to the top, you want novelty. You just want more fucking pleasure. I mean, it's nice to think that like self-actualization is at the top of the pyramid. There is a point at which the thing like you tumble off of the side and even understanding that, understanding that, when we live in the culture that we live in, where, we have so much access to so much. Imperfect, yes, but still access to more than humanity has ever had access to before. And it's like we then get preoccupied with novelty. I mean, that's why people fucking reconnect with their high school boyfriend or girlfriend on Facebook and like, what are you like? You're going to trade in this life that you have built and established with the novelty of some feelings you had when you were 15 years old, which does speak to the power of those imprinting your brain, as we previously spoke to. But really, you're going to trade your life in for the pursuit of that. So, two warnings there. But I do think that we have to be more aware of our hedonistic tendency, which is the ethos of our culture, and then return back to the virtue of love as a practice.
And I think that's a perfect full circle summary that what you just described is the seeking of dopamine, which is the beginning. That's the hunt. Let's go see if anybody's interested. I want to find something meaningful. And then you go through those cycles of oxytocins, the serotonin, cortisol feedback loop, and all the way into beta endorphins, where now it's the long term settling in. I have found that person, or just a friendship relationship. I'm gonna nurture this friendship the way I want the friendship to go. But then what you said, sometimes the brain says, "Oh, wouldn't it be fun to go back to seeking this novelty for a higher hit of dopamine?" And that's indicative that in your own relationship, you're not cultivating the same. You can create those dopamine moments with your partner, just clearly not doing it.
Well, and emphasis on the word create, right? And that's
Mhm.
again where we have to reverse that order of differentiate between, the unearned dopamine of doom scrolling versus the earned dopamine and oxytocin of initiating physical touch when I feel like when I don't want to have anything to do with you. Like those sorts of things. And if we could reverse engineer that, Joe, maybe we could turn things around.
I don't know if we did what Claude wanted us to do, or you,
I'll
whoever.
ask him. Don't
Okay,
worry about it.
we'll figure it out for next time. But I'm gonna jump in with my prompt before you because I don't want you to steal mine.
Damn it. Okay.
You would probably do the same thing. So your example of going holding hands for 20 minutes, taking a walk, no expectation, just being present. So again, that tiny little shift from here's where things are breaking down to what's the smallest possible thing I can do to get back on track. You may remember this. I certainly thought it was monumental and monumentally funny when Tracy and I were in counseling with you a decade or longer ago. You were giving us both homework. We had some individual sessions as well as couple sessions. And 25 years into our marriage, at some point, for some reason, I think I've told this story in one of our podcasts before. Like I'm in the bedroom, like at my closet door, getting something, and all of a sudden, Tracy comes up behind me and gives me a hug from behind. And I just started laughing, which of course was the exact wrong thing to do because now she's like, this is a bid. Matter of fact, it's a bid for reconciliation. And I'm just laughing. And she's like embarrassed now. Like, what are you laughing about? I'm like, in 25 fucking years, that's the first time you've ever just hugged me. Like, just come up for no reason, hugged me. But now I'm telling you, she's the first one every day to extend some kind of touch, a hug, and very genuinely. But she had to learn that. She had to learn to be that vulnerable. And now every day, every morning at 5 a.m., when I bring her her coffee and breakfast, she's already at her computer working. I hand it to her, put it on her desk, and I kiss her. I didn't do that for 25 years. And then at night, when we're, good night, turn off the lights, you know, one of us will slide our foot over and touch the leg of the other person, just kind of a final good night touch. Like, dude, none of that was happening 25 years ago. And we have learned that those kind of moments, and again, I know I'm reinforcing oxytocin and so forth, but just habitually and behaviorally, it's just that time to reconnect. And we're building that track of endorphins. Like I'm still here. We still want this together. You're worth my time and my effort. So I would just say as a prompt, anybody out there who wants to build a better relationship, you want to do something restorative, just start physically making those bids. You can do them emotionally and communicatively as well, but just so powerful just to come up and touch somebody appropriately.
Well, and if I can piggyback that for just a second, and or inappropriately, I mean,
With the right person. Yeah.
right? There's knowing your wife, and I think you would agree with that, that the courage that it took for her to do that was, you talk about just catalytic to so many things in you guys' relationship, but it just, and I can speak to anyone. You are not, we are not asking you to do anything any more difficult than what Tracy did. For her, for her to that it's still like I love hearing that story because I just, knowing Tracy and knowing just that internal inhibition and what it take to push through that and initiate that is just still, I mean, it still makes me tear up every time you talk about that just because of how beautiful it was. Um, I would say do something. Practice love this week. And we talked about it in a previous podcast is, the main reason why most people don't achieve their goals is that their processes are not small enough. Most
Mm.
people aren't willing to do the small things long enough to get to the big thing. And if you find yourself this week at odds with somebody, your spouse, your child, like go do the thing. Like go do the thing. Just grab their hand. Just and we will be on a crusade to elevate back the imperative of physical touch and how healing it is just if we're going to restore the social fabric on a macro level, the fastest way for us to get there is start touching people that you won't get reported to HR for. Um, it just do that thing that feels impossible to do for simply for the sake of doing it. No expectation, no hoping for a certain kind of outcome. I am just going to do the thing for the thing's sake.
You gotta write a book and somehow work in that title. Just doing the smallest things necessary long enough. That to me is biblical. Like that is just that is a sacred thought. Doing the smallest things necessary long enough. That is so Eastern and perfect.
Yes. So we better say goodnight before we fuck it up.
Okay, we'll see what Claude has us do next week. Thank you
Perfect.
guys, Jeff, of course, as always, and we will see you guys next time in Human.